I heard someone once say that playing in a 5-piece bluegrass band is kind of like having 5 people try to play the same drum kit at the exact same time. And I love that analogy because it feels so accurate, right? You know, everyone in the band has to have their own impeccable sense of timing to be able to line up with everyone else and create this mesh, this rhythmic groove and drive that you get with a great bluegrass outfit. But even if you don't play bluegrass, the same is true for any other style of music that we play on the mandolin or any instrument for that matter, right? Timing is so important. And if you don't have good timing, you won't be able to play well with other musicians. So that's why we're here. We're going to spend some time with the rhythmic gold standard, our good friend, the metronome here, right? And I want to show you 7 tips and tricks that you can use with this practice tool to help get you to that next level in your own sense of timing. By the way, if you're new here, my name's David and I'm a full-time mandolin player, and I keep coming back to these exact same 7 metronome ideas because they've been so beneficial to me in my own personal journey towards trying to have better timing, even though I'm still working on it. But I hope they'll be beneficial to you as well, and they're pretty general concepts that you can apply to a lot of different aspects of your practice session, you know, whether you're working on scales or melodies or chords or improvisation or speed training. Just apply, rinse, and repeat. And if you find anything throughout this video that's really helpful, I'd love to hear from you. You know, drop a comment in the section below, leave a like or a subscribe. It all goes a really long way. So we'll just jump right in here with tip number 1, which is simply use less clicks. And what I hear most people do when they first start playing with the metronome is place the click on every single beat in the measure. And that just gets really annoying after a while, right? So this is 200 beats per minute on my metronome, and if we're thinking in 4/4 time, that's a lot, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It just doesn't leave any space for the music to breathe, and it also kind of makes me a little bit anxious because it feels like I have to fight to keep up with that incessant click, right? The main goal for all these tips is to try to wean ourselves off the metronome so that we can improve our own internal sense of timing, and when there's that many clicks, there's just no room for that, right? The metronome becomes a crutch that we rely on. So instead of hearing a quarter note click in 4/4 time at 200 beats per minute, what I would recommend is dropping down the BPM by half to 100, and now you're hearing the same tempo with half as many clicks. In other words, this is a half note click. And of course, if there's anyone out there who prefers to think about things in 2/4 instead of 4/4, the same concept applies. You're just changing the unit of measure. Instead of thinking from quarter note to half notes in 4/4 time, now you're thinking about from eighth notes to quarter notes in 2/4 time. But for this video, we're going to stick to 4/4 just to make sure we're all on the same page. And if you've never done this before, that's a good place to start. In fact, that's my default. Whenever I turn on the metronome, I usually like to hear 2 clicks per measure in 4/4 time. And again, the trick to doing this is just cut the value of the BPM in half to stay at the same tempo with half as many clicks. And if anyone's curious, I'll be using the same metronome app throughout the entire video here. It's an app I use a lot called Time Guru, and I'm not affiliated or sponsored in any way, but there's a link in the description below if you want to check it out. But any metronome app will do, any physical metronome will do as well. So we'll just push on here to tip number 2, which is use even less clicks now. So here we are at 100 BPM and we're hearing the click on every other beat in 4/4 time. It's a half note click, right? So now the idea is to wean ourselves even further off the metronome by cutting this value in half. And instead of hearing half note clicks, now we're going to be hearing whole note clicks at 50 beats per minute. And then of course, you guessed it, next step is to cut this value in half and to play with the click happening once every 2 measures at 25 beats per minute. It's hard to believe that's the same tempo. And that's pretty tricky, right? I usually have to start the metronome at one of those higher values like 100 or 50, start tapping my foot, and then get the metronome down to 25 and see if I can still feel that pulse going while the clicks are so sparse. And of course, you can keep going with this concept if you want to. It's just kind of hard to divide 25 in half on a metronome. But if you start on a different value like 80 beats per minute or 120, you can divide that even further and get down to hearing 1 click for every 4 measures or even 1 click for every 8 measures, which is incredibly hard to do, but it's definitely possible. And here we're not only trying to subdivide those longer clicks, but we're also trying to feel where those bigger beats are in the phrase structure of the music that we're playing. You know, the first beat of every measure, the first beat of every 2 measures, every 4 measures, and so on. Those are really important spots that we want to make sure that we land right on time to keep the music driving forward. And I heard legendary guitar player, bluegrass artist Brian Sutton describe it like this. Imagine you're driving down the highway and you look out the window and you see these telephone poles coming in at regular intervals, right? Imagine those as the bigger beats, the clicks. And then in between the telephone poles, you have this swooping wire that goes down and up and meets the pole right on time every time. And that's what we want to do. You know, in between those bigger clicks, you have the freedom to ebb and flow a little bit, speed up ever so slightly or slow down ever so slightly, as long as you ramp up to meet that next beat right on time. It's a good skill to have. All right, tip number 3 here is to put the click on the unemphasized beats. So in 4/4 here, we try to put the click on beats 2 and 4 to start with. So here we are at 100 BPM again, but now we're hearing it on beats 2 and 4 instead of 1 and 3. And it's kind of like having the click now happen on the same beat as the mandolin chop in a bluegrass ensemble. But for some reason, I still have trouble with this. I have to start counting on 2, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and get my bearings from there. And for one more application here, we're actually going to go back to hearing 200 beats per minute, but now instead of hearing the click on the beats in the measure, we want to hear the click in between the beats. That's kind of tricky. You have to start counting on and with the click. But again, here we're building more metronome independence and beat awareness when we hear the clicks on these kind of underemphasized parts of the measure. All right, moving on to tip number 4 here, which is randomize the clicks. And this one's a little bit app specific. That's why I like using this Time Guru app, because it has a feature called random mute. And you can set the random mute to say 60% here at 100 BPM. And as soon as I hit go, 60% of the clicks are going to be randomly muted, right? So similar to the first few tips, but this one kind of keeps you on your toes with that randomized element. But we're going to move on to something a little bit different here for tip number 5, which is to push against the click. This is an idea that I got from reading a quote from another legendary bluegrass player, Todd Phillips, bassist with the Bluegrass Album Band and so many other amazing artists. And he described rhythm as a hobo in a boxcar. And I think the gist of the analogy is that you have a train moving down a track at a steady rate, that's your tempo, but the hobo within the boxcar is free to move up or down within that boxcar and still stay at the same tempo. So as players, we have the freedom to kind of push ahead of the metronome or drag behind the metronome. And depending on what style of music that we're playing, what type of song we're playing, or what instrument you're playing, you might choose to do one or another. And I don't know why it has to be a hobo, but that's just the analogy. This one's tricky and it's a little bit hard to hear someone demonstrate it without experiencing it yourself. So try putting on that click and see if you can just push ahead ever so slightly without actually losing the click. Now let's try that same thing, but we're going to sit behind the beat now and see if we can play a little bit more relaxed without actually losing that tempo. And it is challenging to do this without totally losing that click, but there's value in it, right? You know, mandolin players, I think, are generally supposed to chop ahead of the beat when they're playing accompaniment to drive that bluegrass band forward. And by becoming more aware of how to do this with the click, it's going to give you that freedom to do so in the band setting without totally derailing that train, and who knows what's going to happen to that hobo. So now we're up to tip number 6, which is click with others. And this is something that I picked up back when I was playing with the bluegrass band Mile 12 up in Boston. And usually to warm up before our shows, we'd all stand around a loudspeaker backstage, put that metronome on there, and try to play some of our more difficult material along with the click as a band. And obviously you don't want to be that person who brings a loudspeaker and a metronome to a bluegrass jam, because that's just not cool. But if you have a band that you play in or some like-minded friends that you get together with often to jam jam with, and you want to work on your timing together, this is an invaluable experience, because now when you play the metronome and play along with it, you're not only listening to that click, but you're having to listen to the other players and make adjustments to fit with both those standards. And this one's going to show you your rhythmic weaknesses and tendencies a little bit more obviously, because when you play along with the click and other people, you're going to compare how you're feeling the beat to how other people are feeling the beat, and you might notice, oh wow, I'm feeling this way far behind the click than whoever else I'm playing with, or vice versa, and you can kind of make these micro adjustments to hopefully line up more in the center and be a tighter unit. And if you're rehearsing performance material with your band with a click like this, it can also show you some areas where there's some unwanted rushing or dragging in your performance to even all that out, make it a little bit more consistent. All right, moving on to our last tip here, tip number 7, which is ditch the click. And like we said at the beginning of the video, our goal here is to use the metronome to help improve our own internal sense of timing so that we can play well with other people. But if we're not playing with other people and we're just using the metronome, we're not going to get better at that. So there comes time to put the metronome away and join that jam, or start a band, or play along with backing tracks or studio recordings so that you can get that real human interaction. There's just no comparison to that. I think some of the best music out there isn't metronomic, and most of my favorite artists don't listen to a metronome in the studio when they're recording or have a click on stage to keep everyone on track. They might start a song at one tempo and end it at a different tempo and have all these rises and falls in the middle, but it's great because the music is living and breathing and the musicians are listening to one another and reacting to where the music needs to go and how the tempo affects that. And I'm sure all those artists have spent a lot of time woodshedding with the metronome in the practice room on their own time, but at the end of the day, you can't really beat playing along with Sam Bush's chop on the mandolin, or Billy Strings on the guitar, or Missy Raines on the bass, or whoever. And the cool thing is that you have all these rhythm monsters available to you at your fingertips at the push of a button. And one of the best rhythmic educations that you can get is just playing along with your favorite bluegrass studio recordings. Because by playing along with that recording, you're not only going to get that steady pulse that you get from the metronome, but you're also going to get the accountability of the chords and the structure of whatever song you're playing with that recording. And you're going to pick up on the nuances and the musicality of how these amazing players are playing it. And that's going to start to rub off on you in ways that you can't even imagine yet. And hey, if you want to grab some studio quality backing tracks for some common bluegrass repertoire, even recorded at some different tempos so you can practice along, then you can find all that over on my Patreon page up here in the cards above. And there's tons of other stuff there that you won't find here on the channel, like access to past live streams, access to PDF transcriptions for tablature notation, for fun mandolin solos, for fiddle tunes, all sorts of stuff like that, including transcription for the tune that you've been hearing throughout this video. If anyone was curious about what I've been playing throughout this, it's a fun tune called The Cuckoo's Nest, and we actually did a recent video lesson for this one that you can see here on screen. Just click this video if you want to learn the chords, the melody, and a fun solo for this one. All the resources that you need are right there to learn it, and I hope you enjoy it. And I hope you enjoyed this video and the 7 metronome tips here. Let me know in the comments below if they're useful, or if you have any other useful tips for how to use this metronome to improve our own internal sense of timing. And I'll look forward to hearing from you. Until then, I'll see you in the next one.